Okay, so in this tutorial I'm just going to quickly go through some of the protective layers surrounding the brain. So we looked at the structure of the brain itself, and in this one we're going to look at some of the protective layers surrounding it. This will be a really quick little one. So firstly, obviously there is the skull. So this really protects our brain from injury, from bumps, and without it basically the soft brain tissue would damage really easily. So the brain tissue itself, these neurons, it's a very soft tissue. You could, with your hands, if you squeezed it, it's almost, it feels quite jelly-like, and you can damage it quite easily. The cerebrospinal fluid is a fluid that essentially surrounds the brain, and that acts already as a little bit of a shock absorber. If there was just a space, the brain, if it could sort of rattle around in the skull, whenever it would bump the sides, it would cause bruising or could cause damage. So there's a layer of there's cerebrospinal fluid fills in the spaces around the brain to try and prevent movement and to prevent kind of bumping. Acts as a little bit of a shock absorber. Anyway, in between the skull and the brain are essentially 3 layers of membranes. And these are protective layers, and they're quite tough membranes, or at least one of them is quite a tough layer of membrane, and it sort of just encases the brain. And between those layers, again, is cerebrospinal fluid, which helps, again, to act as kind of a shock absorber. So these layers are called the meninges. And so the meninges are these layers that surround the brain. So the layers protecting the brain, we've obviously got the skull, the meninges, these layers of membranes. Now if you're wondering what a membrane is just kind of sort of like a thin film. It's a thin layer. I always think of like when you're peeling an eggshell, you've got the shell and then you've got a thin membrane underneath. You may have seen that when you peel an egg. So when I think of membranes, I think of kind of something like that. It's kind of a thin sheet of tissue that sort of covers or encases or surrounds something. So here we go. Skull, cerebrospinal fluid, and meninges, 3 layers of membranes with a bit of cerebrospinal fluid between each. And again, they help just to protect the brain slightly. Now obviously there's limits. If you hit your head hard enough, or even just if you deaccelerate, like in a car, if you crash, even if your head doesn't hit something, if the force of stopping so suddenly, if it's large enough, the brain can actually, still bruise or be damaged against the inside of the skull. So the brain is a fairly delicate organ, but our skull and the meninges definitely do offer a decent level of protection. So most activities, if you're walking down the road or even on your bike, and you sort of came off and bumped your head, most injuries aren't going to cause any permanent damage. I think largely to cause permanent damage, you generally cause permanent damage when you actually break the skull itself. The one exception there is in a car crash. Sometimes if you stop so suddenly in a crash, when you hit a wall or another car, even if your head doesn't hit something, the brain inside the skull can keep moving a little bit, and you've probably seen all the gruesome ads on TV kind of showing that. So yeah, those are the 3 layers protecting the brain, and next we're going to look at the autonomic and somatic nervous system.